He had been feeling tired for a long time, the kind of tired that goes beyond just your body. It settles deep inside your mind and heart, and no matter how much you sleep, it never leaves. Every morning he would wake up with the same heavy feeling, like a weight pressing down on his chest. He had tried to push through it, telling himself that things would get better, but the days all started to feel the same. The world outside seemed to move faster than he could keep up with, and somehow he had gotten left behind. His apartment was small and quiet, the kind of place that feels lonelier when no one is there. The walls were bare, the furniture was simple, and every corner carried a memory of missed opportunities. He would often sit by the window, staring at the streets below, watching people hurry by with their lives, feeling like he was invisible, just another face in the crowd. Sometimes he wondered how people could go on with such energy, while he struggled to find a reason to leave his bed in the morning. Work had become a place of obligation rather than purpose. He did his tasks mechanically, showing up on time, doing what was required, and leaving without any real feeling of accomplishment. His colleagues were polite, but no one seemed to notice if he was there or not. He would watch them laugh and talk in small groups and wonder why he could never join in. It wasn't that they were unfriendly. It was that he had built walls around himself over the years. Walls that kept others out but also kept him lonely. Bills piled up on the kitchen counter, each one a reminder that life demanded more than he could give. He had dreams once, big ones, but somewhere along the way, they had faded into the background, replaced by the constant struggle to survive. He remembered the days when he had felt alive, when he had hoped for something better. But those memories seemed distant now, like scenes from someone else's life. The hope he had once carried had been replaced with caution and fear. The fear of failing again. Family was far away. He hadn't spoken to his parents in months, and the few times he had tried, the conversations had been awkward, filled with silences that hurt more than words could. Friends had drifted away one by one, as if life had a way of separating people who didn't fit neatly into its plans. He found himself alone more often than not, and the silence of his apartment felt heavier every day. Even when he went out, he couldn't shake the feeling of being disconnected, like a shadow moving through the world without really touching it. He tried small things to lift himself up, to feel something different. He would take walks in the park, hoping the fresh air would clear his mind. He would listen to music, hoping it would remind him of better times. Sometimes he even tried journaling, writing down thoughts he didn't dare say out loud. But no matter what he did, the feeling remained, a constant reminder that life was happening around him while he stayed stuck. There were moments when he wondered if anyone truly cared. He had met people over the years, people who had promised support or friendship, but life had a way of pulling them away. The disappointment had built up over time, layer upon layer, until he had stopped reaching out altogether. He had stopped expecting anything from others, and slowly he had started expecting very little from himself as well. It was easier that way. It hurt less to hope for nothing. Sometimes when he walked through the streets at night, he would see groups of people laughing and sharing stories, and a strange pang would hit him. He longed for connection, for someone to see him, really see him, and not just glance past. He remembered what it felt like to be understood, to have someone listen without judgment, but those moments had become rare. Most people were too busy with their own lives, too wrapped up in their own struggles to notice someone else's pain. And he understood that in a way, but it didn't make the loneliness easier to bear. He had lost faith in many things, luck, opportunity, even himself. It was hard to imagine that life could change when he had been stuck in the same cycle for so long. He had tried to fight back against the feelings of despair, to push himself to do something, anything that would break the routine, but the fear of failure was stronger than the desire to try. Every time he considered taking a step forward, he thought of the past mistakes, the chances he had missed, and the shame that followed him like a shadow. Yet deep down, there was a small part of him that still believed in something better. It was buried under layers of doubt and pain, but it was there, quietly waiting. Sometimes it appeared when he least expected it. A memory of a kind word from a friend, a moment of laughter that had felt real, a time when he had felt proud of himself. Those moments reminded him that he was still capable of feeling joy, even if it seemed distant, and that tiny spark, though fragile, was enough to keep him going day by day, even when the world felt like too much. On one particularly quiet morning, He woke up feeling heavier than usual. The usual routine felt meaningless, and even getting out of bed seemed like a monumental task. He looked around his apartment and felt a sharp ache of loneliness. The walls seemed to close in, the silence pressing down on him. He didn't have anyone to call, anyone to talk to, anyone to share the small moments with. The thought of facing the day filled him with a sense of dread he couldn't shake. As he made his way to work, the streets were bustling with people, all of them moving with purpose, all of them connected in ways he couldn't reach. He walked among them like a ghost, unnoticed and untouched. He wondered if anyone ever felt the way he did, if anyone else experienced life as a series of long, quiet, lonely hours. The thought gave him a strange sense of solidarity, but it didn't ease the ache inside. That day he sat at his desk, staring at the computer screen, going through the motions without really paying attention. Every task felt meaningless, every email a reminder of the monotony that had taken over his life. He watched the clock, counting down the minutes until he could go home, hoping that the quiet of his apartment would somehow feel comforting. But even there he knew the emptiness would follow him, waiting in the corners, reminding him of all that he lacked. He remembered a time when he had dreamed of making a difference, of doing something meaningful, but those dreams had faded. Life had a way of wearing him down, little by little, until he had stopped believing in himself. He had been told many times that he was capable, that he had potential, but those words seemed hollow now. How could anyone believe in him when he couldn't even believe in himself? Yet as he sat there staring out the window at the busy street below, he noticed a small detail that he hadn't before. A man helping an elderly woman cross the street, a child smiling at a dog, someone holding the door open for a stranger. These small acts of kindness struck him in a way he hadn't expected. For a brief moment he felt something stir inside, a reminder that life could still hold moments of beauty and connection. It was fleeting, but it was enough to make him pause and breathe. As the day went on, he continued to feel the weight of his struggles, but that tiny spark of hope remained, like a single candle flickering in the dark. He didn't know what would come next or if anything could truly change, but for the first time in a long while, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, there was a chance. A chance that things could be different. A chance that life might have something more to offer than the endless cycle of loneliness and despair. And though he didn't know it yet, that small spark was about to lead him to someone who would see him, truly see him in a way no one else had. Someone who would challenge him to believe again. Someone who would show him that miracles could happen when you least expect them. He was walking home that evening, the streets dimly lit by the fading light of the setting sun. The city had that quiet feeling that comes just before night fully takes over. People hurried by with umbrellas or coats, heads down, eyes fixed on their phones or their destinations. He moved along the sidewalk without really noticing anything, his mind still heavy with the thoughts that had weighed on him all day. Work had been exhausting in its dullness, and the weight of his loneliness pressed on him like it always did. As he turned a corner near a small park, he noticed someone sitting on a bench. At first he didn't pay much attention, assuming it was just another person enjoying the evening air. But there was something unusual about the figure. The person was older, perhaps in their 50s, with kind eyes and a calm presence. They weren't rushed or distracted. They were simply sitting, looking at the trees, at the people passing by as if they had all the time in the world. He hesitated for a moment, feeling the pull of curiosity mixed with caution. Something about the stranger's calmness felt different from the hurried world around them. He found himself slowing down as he approached, almost without realizing it. The stranger looked up and noticed him. Their gaze was gentle, patient, and unexpectedly warm. For a moment it felt like the stranger could see through him, past the walls he had built, straight to the tiredness in his heart. "Evening," the stranger said, their voice soft but clear. There was no judgment in it, no rush to fill the silence, just a simple acknowledgement that he was there. "Evening," he replied, slightly taken aback by how normal and calm it felt to be greeted. It had been a long time since anyone had looked at him and spoken with that kind of attention. The stranger patted the empty space on the bench beside them. "Care to sit for a moment?" they asked. He hesitated. It was unusual for him to engage with strangers. He had learned long ago that it was safer to keep people at a distance. But something in the stranger's eyes invited trust, something that felt rare in a world that had taught him to expect disappointment. Slowly, he sat down, leaving enough space between them to feel comfortable, but close enough to notice the stranger's presence fully. They sat in silence for a while, watching the orange glow of the sun fade into the gray of evening. It was not an awkward silence. It was a silence that allowed breathing, a pause from the constant noise of life. Finally, the stranger spoke again. "You seem tired," they said simply, almost like a statement of fact. Not a question, not an accusation, just an observation. He looked down at his hands, fidgeting with the edge of his sleeve. He wasn't used to people noticing. "Yeah," he said quietly. "It's been a long day." "I can tell," the stranger replied. "Sometimes long days pile on top of each other, and you start to feel like you're buried, like there's no space to breathe." He was surprised at how accurately the stranger described his feelings. Normally, people offered advice or empty encouragement, but this felt different. The stranger wasn't trying to fix anything. They were simply acknowledging it, recognizing it, which was something he hadn't realized he needed. I guess," he said, unsure why he was talking to a stranger at all. "I just feel stuck, I suppose," the stranger nodded slowly. "It happens to everyone at some point. Some people get stuck for a short while, others for longer. But being stuck doesn't mean you're broken. It just means you're human." Those words were simple, but they landed with surprising weight. He hadn't thought about his struggles in that way before. He had always seen himself as failing, as incapable of getting things right. But the stranger's words didn't judge. They reframed it. Being stuck wasn't a sign of weakness. It was part of the journey. They sat together for a while longer, talking quietly about everyday things, the weather, the people walking by, small details of life that usually went unnoticed. The stranger had a way of making even the ordinary feel important, as if the simple act of noticing was a kind of magic. He found himself talking more than he had in months, telling little stories about his day, the frustrations at work, the quiet sadness at home. The stranger listened, really listened, without interrupting or offering cliches. It was a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time, being truly seen. At one point, the stranger asked, "Do you believe that small acts can lead to big changes?" He frowned slightly. "I don't know. I used to, maybe, but life doesn't always work that way." The stranger smiled, a gentle, knowing smile. "Life doesn't always show the results immediately. Sometimes it asks for trust, patience, and a willingness to try even when the outcome is uncertain." He looked at the stranger, a little puzzled. "Trust, patience, try. It sounds so easy when you say it, but in reality it's not." "No," the stranger admitted. "It's not easy. But sometimes the hardest things are also the most necessary. Sometimes believing in something or someone can create ripples you never imagined, even in ways you can't see at first." He felt a stirring in his chest, a tiny flicker of curiosity mixed with hope. Could it be that someone could see him and believe in him in this way? Could he take a chance, even a small one, just to see what might happen? The thought was foreign, almost frightening, but strangely appealing. They continued talking, the conversation flowing naturally, without pressure or expectation. He realized he hadn't felt this comfortable with anyone in a very long time. The stranger wasn't judging, wasn't trying to rush him into anything, but somehow, their presence made him feel lighter. He noticed how relaxed he was, how easy it was to breathe in their company. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to hope, even if just a little. As the evening grew darker, the stranger stood up. "I should be going," they said. "But I hope you remember this. Even when life feels heavy and even when it feels like no one notices, there is always a way forward. Sometimes it begins with believing, even in something or someone you can barely understand." He nodded, feeling a strange mix of gratitude and uncertainty. I'll try to remember that," he said quietly. The stranger smiled and gave a small nod before walking away, disappearing into the dim streets. He watched them go, feeling a sense of emptiness from their absence, but also an unusual warmth, a spark that had not been there before. It was as if a door had been opened, just a crack, but enough for the possibility of change to sneak in. That night, he couldn't sleep easily. He replayed the conversation over and over in his mind. The stranger's words, the calm way they had looked at him, the belief they seemed to carry. It all lingered in his thoughts. For the first time in a long time, he considered the idea that maybe he wasn't as stuck as he had thought. Maybe there was a chance for something different, something better, even if he didn't fully understand what that could be yet. The next few days, He found himself thinking about the stranger often, wondering who they were and why they had taken the time to talk to him. Life was still hard, work was still monotonous, and his apartment still felt lonely, but something had shifted inside him. That small spark of hope, kindled by someone who didn't even know him well, had begun to grow. He began noticing small things again, acts of kindness from strangers, moments of beauty in the city, small victories in his own day. It was subtle at first, just a flicker in his mind, but it was enough to make him move differently, think differently, even act differently. He began to allow himself to take small risks, speak to people he would have avoided before, try little things he had been afraid of. The stranger's belief had planted a seed, one that had started to grow quietly in the background of his life. And though he didn't know it yet, this encounter was only the beginning. The stranger had left him with more than words. They had left him with a chance, a possibility he hadn't felt in a long time. And as he went through the next few days holding on to that small spark, he began to see that miracles could start in the simplest ways. Sometimes, with a single person believing in you, even if they were a complete stranger. After that evening in the park, he couldn't stop thinking about the stranger. Their calm presence, their gentle words, the way they had truly listened. It was unlike anything he had experienced in years. He found himself replaying the conversation over and over, wondering why someone he barely knew had cared enough to speak to him. He knew deep down that he could not let that encounter pass as a mere coincidence. Something inside him felt stirred, awake for the first time in a long time. A few days later, he found himself walking past the park again. The sun was high this time, casting bright light across the benches and pathways. He wasn't sure why, but he felt a pull to go there, to see if the stranger might appear again. As he approached, he saw them sitting on the same bench, reading a small notebook. The stranger looked up as he neared, and their face broke into a small, welcoming smile. "Hello," the stranger said, closing the notebook. "It's good to see you again." "Hi," he replied, feeling a strange mix of nervousness and excitement. I wasn't sure I'd see you here again." "That's okay," the stranger said. "You don't have to be sure. Sometimes things just happen when they are meant to." They sat together, and for a while it was the same quiet, comforting presence as before. Then the stranger leaned back slightly and spoke with a serious tone. "I wanted to ask you something. Something important." He felt his heart tighten a little. "What is it?" "I want to give you an opportunity," the stranger said. "An opportunity to take a step you've been avoiding for a long time." He frowned. "Step? I don't understand. What kind of step?" The stranger smiled gently. "I mean a step toward life, towards something you have wanted but have been too afraid to try. It won't be easy. In fact, it may feel impossible, but I believe you can do it. I believe in you." He laughed softly, a nervous, skeptical laugh. "You don't even know me. How can you believe in me?" "Maybe that's true," the stranger said. "But sometimes belief comes from seeing the spark, not the entire fire. I see the spark in you. And sometimes all it takes is one small nudge for someone to realize what they are capable of." He stared at them, unsure what to say. The words were kind and uplifting, but they also scared him. They asked for trust, for courage, for hope, things he hadn't felt in years. The stranger wasn't offering advice or easy solutions. They were offering a challenge, and challenges had always terrified him. "What do you want me to do?" he asked finally, his voice quiet. "I want you to try something that scares you," the stranger said. "Something you've wanted but never had the courage to pursue. It doesn't have to be huge. It can be small. But it has to matter to you. It has to be something that will change how you see yourself, even just a little." He shook his head slowly. "I don't know if I can. I've tried before. I fail. I always fail." "Failure is not the end," the stranger said. "Failure is a step along the way. You only fail when you stop trying. Right now you have a chance to try to take one step forward. That's all I'm asking. One step." He thought about it. His life had been filled with missed chances, with fear of failure, with a constant retreat from the world. Yet for some reason he felt a stirring of possibility. Maybe he could try. Maybe he could take a small risk, even if it was terrifying. I'll try," he said finally, his voice shaking slightly. "I don't know how, but I'll try." The stranger nodded, their eyes warm and encouraging. "That's all anyone can ask. The rest will follow. Just take the first step." Over the next few days, he thought carefully about what that first step could be. It wasn't easy. The fear of failing, of being judged, of proving himself wrong, loomed over him like a shadow. He considered giving up several times, convincing himself that he wasn't ready, that it wasn't worth the risk. But every time he remembered the stranger's words, a small voice inside him urged him to keep going. Finally, he decided on something. It wasn't a huge, life-altering decision. It wasn't going to solve all his problems overnight, but it was meaningful to him. It was something he had wanted for a long time but had been too afraid to pursue. It was the kind of step that required courage, vulnerability, and belief in himself, things he hadn't given himself permission to do in years. He prepared quietly, thinking through every detail, imagining the worst-case scenarios and hoping they wouldn't come true. Each day he felt a mixture of fear and anticipation. His heart would race at the thought of taking action, but the spark that the stranger had ignited gave him the strength to continue. He realized that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite it. The day finally came. He felt a knot of anxiety in his stomach as he set out, unsure of what awaited him. Each step felt heavy but also purposeful. He remembered the stranger's calm presence, their belief in him, and it carried him forward. Along the way, he faced moments of doubt, questions about whether he was capable, whether this would even matter. Each doubt was like a small stone in his path, but he stepped over them one by one, determined to follow through. When he arrived at the place where he had decided to take this step, he felt the weight of the moment. The fear was almost paralyzing. His hands shook and his mind raced with every possible mistake he could make. But then he closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and remembered the stranger's words. "One step is all I'm asking." One step. With that in mind, he acted. The first movement was awkward, uncertain, but it was real. He didn't know if it would succeed, if it would lead to anything, but he had begun, and that was enough. The initial motion created momentum, and soon he was moving more confidently, more deliberately. He felt the strange mixture of fear and exhilaration, the kind of feeling that comes when you do something meaningful, something that matters deeply to you. Along the way, there were setbacks. Things didn't go perfectly. People questioned him. Circumstances created obstacles and doubts whispered in his mind. But every time he hesitated, he remembered the stranger, the calm voice, the patient belief. That memory became his anchor. It reminded him why he had started, why he was taking this risk, and why it mattered. By the end of the day, he had achieved more than he had expected. Not everything had gone smoothly, but the act of trying, the decision to move despite fear, had already changed him. He felt a new sense of energy, a small but growing confidence. He realized that the value wasn't in perfection. It was in the effort, in the courage to begin. He had taken a step that once felt impossible, and that step had opened a door he hadn't even noticed before. When he finally returned home, he felt exhausted but alive in a way he hadn't felt in years. The apartment still seemed quiet, but it no longer felt suffocating. There was a sense of possibility in the air, a feeling that life might be larger than the walls around him. He sat by the window for a long time, reflecting on the day, thinking about the stranger and marveling at what had happened. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to hope. Not just a small fleeting hope, but a real, tangible possibility that life could change, that he could change. That taking a step, however small, could lead to something extraordinary. He didn't know what the future held, and he didn't know if this moment would lead to immediate success or not. But he had discovered something important, that courage was not about knowing the outcome, but about daring to begin. And in daring to begin, he had witnessed the first signs of transformation. And though he didn't see it yet, the stranger's words had planted more than courage. They had planted faith. Faith not just in action, but in the unseen possibilities, in the ripple effects of small choices, and in the power of belief, belief in himself, and eventually, belief in the extraordinary that could follow. The days that followed his first step were not easy, but they felt different. For the first time in years, he woke up with a faint sense of purpose. It wasn't loud or overwhelming. It was quiet but steady, like a small flame that refused to go out. He started noticing things around him that he had ignored before. The way sunlight filtered through his window in the morning, the sound of footsteps on the street below, the smell of coffee from the cafe across the road. Life hadn't changed completely, but he had started to notice it again, and that alone felt like progress. Each morning he would remind himself of the stranger's words. One step, he would whisper quietly before beginning his day. That became his promise to himself, to take one small step each day even if it scared him. Some days that step was as simple as smiling at someone or starting a conversation. Other days it was pushing himself to try something new, something that reminded him he was still alive. At work, he began to change too. He started greeting people instead of keeping to himself. The first few times felt awkward, and some people didn't respond right away, but slowly things shifted. A few colleagues began to smile back, ask how he was, and include him in small talks. For years he had been invisible, but now he was slowly becoming part of the world again. He realized that when he showed a little bit of openness, people often responded with kindness. Outside of work, he began taking small actions to bring back the things he once loved. He used to enjoy sketching, so he bought a cheap notebook and a pencil. The first drawings were clumsy and uneven, but they made him feel calm. Sometimes he would sit in the park where he had met the stranger, sketching people walking by or the trees swaying gently. Each line he drew felt like another piece of himself returning, a reminder that he hadn't lost everything. Days turned into weeks, and he began to feel lighter. He wasn't completely healed, and there were still nights when the loneliness returned. But the difference now was that he didn't let it drown him. Instead, he would look at his sketches, remember the stranger's calm voice, and tell himself that he was still on the journey. Life was no longer a heavy burden to carry. It was something he was slowly learning to walk through again. Then one afternoon, something unexpected happened. He was leaving work when he saw a small crowd gathered near the street corner. A car had broken down and a young woman was struggling to push it to the side. People were walking by, pretending not to notice. For a moment, he almost did the same, but then the stranger's words echoed in his mind. Sometimes small acts can create big changes. Without overthinking, he walked over to help. The woman looked surprised but grateful. Together, they pushed the car out of the road. It was exhausting, but when they were done, she smiled warmly and thanked him. That simple thank you did something to him. It reminded him of how good it felt to be useful, to be kind, to be human. It wasn't a grand act, but in that moment it felt like a small miracle. That night, as he sat by his window, he couldn't stop thinking about it. Helping someone had made him feel alive in a way he hadn't expected. It wasn't about recognition or reward, it was about connection. He realized that maybe the stranger had been right all along. Maybe change didn't always come from waiting for something big to happen. Maybe it came from the little choices that built upon each other, quietly shaping who we became. He started helping more often after that, not because he was trying to fix others, but because it helped fix something inside him. When he saw an older man struggling with groceries, he offered to help carry them. When a neighbor's mailbox fell apart, he fixed it. When someone looked lost, he gave directions with a smile. These were small things, but they brought him closer to people, to life itself. With time, he realized something else. The more kindness he shared, the more it came back to him. The world seemed to open up slowly but surely. He began having real conversations again. People started recognizing him, greeting him, even thanking him for small things. He wasn't invisible anymore, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he belonged somewhere. Still, he couldn't stop thinking about the stranger. He hadn't seen them again since that day at the park, but their words and presence remained with him. Sometimes he wondered if he had imagined it all, if the encounter had been some kind of dream. But then he would remember the warmth in their eyes, the certainty in their voice, and he knew it had been real. The stranger had come into his life at the right time, just when he had been ready to give up. One evening, while sketching in the park, he noticed an elderly man sitting on a bench nearby. The man looked lost, confused, and tired. His clothes were worn, and he was staring down at his hands as if the world had forgotten him. For a moment he hesitated, just as he used to when faced with people's pain. But then he remembered how the stranger had once looked at him, with kindness, without judgment. He stood up, walked over, and gently asked, "Are you okay, sir?" The man looked up, startled, but then smiled weakly. I'm fine. Just trying to remember which bus goes home," he said quietly. Without thinking twice, he sat beside him and helped figure it out. They talked for a while about life, about small things. The old man shared stories of his youth, his work, his children who lived far away. Listening to him, he realized how much people just needed to be heard. They didn't always need answers. Sometimes they just needed someone to sit beside them. When the man finally got on his bus, he waved goodbye, and for the rest of the evening, he felt an overwhelming peace. He had done for someone else what the stranger had done for him. He had seen them, listened to them, believed in them, even if just for a short moment. That night he smiled to himself, realizing that maybe this was what the stranger had meant all along. He began to see life differently after that. The small miracles were everywhere. A kind word at the right time, a stranger's smile, a moment of courage, a shared laugh. It wasn't about perfect days or grand achievements anymore. It was about connection, growth, and faith. The quiet, steady belief that goodness still existed even in ordinary moments. As the weeks passed, something else began to change inside him. He started to believe not only in people but in himself. The voice of doubt that once controlled his thoughts began to fade. He started setting small goals again. He applied for a position at work that required confidence he once didn't have. He spoke more freely, shared his ideas, and began to be noticed. There were still setbacks. There were still nights when the loneliness tried to creep back in, but he no longer surrendered to it. He had learned that pain didn't have to define him. It could teach him instead. He had learned that people who cross our paths even briefly can sometimes see the best in us when we can't see it ourselves. And through that belief, miracles can begin to unfold. One late evening, he returned to the park again. The benches were mostly empty, the air cool and calm. He sat quietly looking around, wondering if the stranger might ever return. He wanted to thank them, to tell them that their words had changed his life, that he had found hope again. But as he sat there, he realized something profound. Maybe he didn't need to find the stranger anymore. Maybe the purpose of their meeting wasn't for him to depend on them, but to become like them, to carry forward the same kindness, the same belief into the world. He smiled softly at the thought. The stranger had given him a gift, the courage to believe, to act, to see miracles where others might see ordinary moments. He didn't need to search for them anymore because in a quiet way they lived on in him. Every act of kindness he gave, every person he helped, every time he believed in someone, it was all a reflection of the miracle that had begun that day on the park bench. He stood up and looked at the sky, the stars faint but visible. Life still had challenges ahead, he knew that, but he no longer feared them, because now he believed not just in others but in himself. And that belief was its own kind of miracle. Months passed and the world around him kept changing. The leaves that had once fallen in shades of gold were now back again, green and full of life. The park that had once been a place of sadness for him had now become a symbol of peace. Every corner of that place carried a memory, a reminder of how far he had come. The man who once avoided people now greeted strangers with a smile, and sometimes they smiled back in ways that warmed his heart. One Saturday morning, as he sat on his favorite bench sketching, he noticed something unusual. A young boy, maybe 12 or 13, was sitting alone on the grass not too far away. His clothes were neat but worn, and he kept glancing at people as if hoping someone would notice him. The man could sense that familiar look, the quiet mix of fear and loneliness. It was the same expression he once carried himself. He sat there for a while, debating whether to approach. A part of him hesitated, worried he might make the boy uncomfortable. But something deep inside urged him forward. He remembered the stranger who once approached him when he was at his lowest. Maybe this was his moment to do the same for someone else. He walked over slowly and sat a short distance away so he wouldn't startle the boy. After a few moments, he said softly, "It's a nice day, isn't it?" The boy didn't answer right away, just nodded. The man noticed how the boy's eyes stayed fixed on the ground. He continued gently, "You come here often?" The boy shook his head. "No, I just needed some air," he said, his voice small and unsure. The man smiled kindly. "Sometimes fresh air helps. It clears the mind." The boy looked at him then, studying his face as if deciding whether to trust him. "Do you come here a lot?" he asked quietly. "Almost every week," the man replied. "It used to be the only place I felt calm. Now it's where I remind myself how far I've come." Something shifted in the boy's expression. He looked curious. "Far from what?" The man hesitated for a moment, then answered honestly, "From giving up, from losing hope, from forgetting that good things can still happen." The boy looked away, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. Then the boy whispered, "I think I know what that feels like." The man felt a familiar ache in his chest. He didn't pry. Instead, he said softly, "It's okay. You don't have to explain. Sometimes just sitting with someone who understands is enough." They sat there in silence for a while, the quiet broken only by the sound of leaves rustling. The boy eventually began to talk, slowly at first, then more openly. He spoke about how his parents were always arguing, how he felt invisible at home, and how he had started skipping classes because no one seemed to care. His words were filled with confusion and sadness, and the man could hear the same hopelessness that he had once carried inside himself. He listened carefully, not interrupting. When the boy finally stopped talking, the man said gently, "You know, it's easy to believe that no one cares. I used to think that too. But sometimes it's not that people don't care. It's just that they don't see what's really happening inside you. You have to give someone a chance to see you." The boy frowned. "What if they still don't?" "Then you keep believing that someone will," the man said softly. "Because someone will. I met a stranger once who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. It changed my whole life." The boy looked up at him, curious. "A stranger?" "Yes," he said with a small smile. "They didn't know me at all, but they saw something in me that I couldn't see. They told me to take one small step each day. It sounded simple, but it changed everything." The boy looked thoughtful, as if trying to understand how such a small thing could matter so much. The man continued, "You don't have to fix everything at once. Just take one small step. Talk to someone. Go back to school. Draw something. Do anything that reminds you you're still here." The boy nodded slowly. "One step," he repeated quietly, as if testing the words. "That's right," the man said. "Just one step at a time." They sat together for a while longer. When the boy finally stood to leave, he looked different. Not completely happy, but lighter somehow. Before walking away, he turned and said, "Thanks for talking to me." The man smiled. "Anytime. Remember, one small step." As the boy walked away, the man felt something stir in his heart. It was the same warmth he had felt the day the stranger had helped him. But this time it wasn't about being helped, it was about helping someone else. In that moment, he realized he had become the very thing that had once saved him. Days went by, and he often thought about that boy. He wondered if he had gone back to school, if he was doing better. He never saw him again, but somehow that didn't matter. He believed that the boy would be okay because someone had once believed the same for him. As time passed, his life continued to grow in quiet, steady ways. His sketches started getting noticed online, and people began reaching out to buy them. He didn't expect it, but it filled him with pride. Not because of money or attention, but because it reminded him that something beautiful could grow from pain. His art wasn't just drawings. It was proof of survival, of healing. One day, while setting up his sketches for a small local exhibition, he heard a familiar voice behind him. "You've come a long way." He froze. Slowly, he turned around, and there stood the stranger. They looked almost exactly the same as before, calm and kind. Their eyes filled with the same warmth that had once saved him. For a moment, he couldn't speak. He began, his voice trembling slightly. "I didn't think I'd ever see you again." The stranger smiled gently. "You weren't supposed to look for me. You were supposed to keep moving forward. And you did." He felt his eyes sting with emotion. "You changed my life," he said softly. "I don't know how to thank you." The stranger shook their head. "You already have. You believed. You helped others. You became the miracle you were waiting for." Those words hit him deeply. He realized they were true. The stranger hadn't just saved him. They had awakened something inside him that had been asleep for years. He looked at the stranger, his voice shaking slightly. "You knew this would happen, didn't you?" The stranger smiled faintly. "I just believed it could. The rest was up to you." There was a moment of silence between them, filled with understanding. Then the stranger glanced at the sketches displayed around them, drawings of people, moments, emotions, and said, "These will help more people than you know. Keep sharing them. Keep believing." He nodded, unable to speak. When he blinked, the stranger had already started walking away. For a second, he wanted to call out, but something told him not to. Some people weren't meant to stay. They were meant to appear just long enough to change the course of your life. As he stood there, Surrounded by his sketches and the soft buzz of the small crowd gathering for the exhibition, he felt something powerful inside him, a quiet joy, a deep gratitude, and a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. He finally understood what the stranger meant by miracle. It wasn't a sudden magical event. It was a series of small, human moments, one act of kindness, one belief, one step at a time, that slowly built into something extraordinary. Later that evening, as he walked home, the city lights shimmered softly against the night sky. He thought about the stranger, the boy, and the journey that had led him here. He realized that the miracle he had witnessed wasn't something that happened to him. It was something that had grown within him. He had once been a man lost in darkness, waiting for life to give him a reason to believe. But now, he had become someone who could light the way for others. The miracle wasn't in being saved, it was in learning how to save others by sharing the same belief that had once saved him. He stopped for a moment, looking up at the stars. A soft breeze brushed his face, and he smiled quietly to himself. Life still had its challenges, but he no longer feared them. Because now he knew, belief could turn even the smallest act into something extraordinary. As he walked away, the night felt brighter somehow, the world gentler, and his heart full. He didn't know where the road ahead would take him, but he was ready for it. After all, he had learned the greatest lesson of all. When you believe in a stranger, sometimes you end up witnessing a miracle. But when you learn to believe in yourself, you become one.